The two-handed debate will never end. There still seems to be a big divide on opinion, even though two-handed bowling is much like a hurtling runaway train. There's simply no stopping it. Many of the old school bowlers detest two-handed bowling and feel like it's ruined the game. But I think many people have just accepted the fact that two-handers are here to stay and that this isn't just some fad that will eventually die out. So what do I mean by the title when I say that two-handed bowling is a sin? Well, I have to admit this is of course a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I guess what I'm trying to say with this title is that this sums up to me what the old school bowlers think. In centuries past, it goes without saying that adultery was considered a huge sin, as would having sex before marriage. I don't need to explain to you all just how much times have changed and now premarital sex dominates our society. Of course, there are many religious people out there still who will abide by this sacred rule of no sex until marriage, but of course they have no control over what the majority of the population does. Now, just as a little disclaimer, I'm not suggesting that adultery or sex before marriage is right or wrong. You must do what you believe is right for you. But I guess the point I'm making is that it's no good complaining or worrying about what other people do because you have no control over others. Times always change. So when you have people who are firmly in the anti-two-handed club who start complaining, well, to me it feels like they would belong in the 15th century, as they simply refuse to move on with the times. They really do seem to treat two-handed bowling with such contempt that anyone would think that it's the unwritten 8th deadly sin. Now, I understand that protecting the fundamentals and the integrity of the game is important. I personally have always been in a bit of the two minds about two-handers, just because I can see both sides to the argument. So right now I feel like I'm quite neutral about it. In my mind, it is what it is. Just like with anything, it has its pros and cons, and likewise it's changed the game for both the better and the worse. But you could say the same about a lot of things in the game that have changed. So, I'm not the biggest lover of two-handers, I have to admit, but I'm certainly not anti-two-handers either. The one huge positive I will say about two-handed bowling is that it has made the game extremely accessible. I feel like people who see someone like Belmonte bowl will look at him and think, I could do that. There's a reason so many young kids have started with two hands, because it's just so much easier for them to get the ball down the lane with two hands at such a young age. You'll see a number of young children who start out bowling will do a sort of a two-handed approach where they will almost run up on the approach and push the ball out in front of them, almost like you would when making a basketball pass. And then as they get a bit older, many will switch to one hand, but a lot of them now are sticking with the two-handed style. But it's just a very accessible style for many people when trying to learn the game. The key is though that it's a very difficult style to master. I think we've all tried bowling with two hands at one point, and I'm sure many of you will agree that it's not quite as easy as it looks. The hardest part is consistency with that particular style, so I certainly have respect for many two-handers, and clearly it is a difficult style to master, because if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. Of course, some people do manage to switch from one hand to two, and vice versa, but it can be a tough transition. The easiest way, of course, is to simply learn and master the two-handed style from a young age. And just before we continue, I'd like to thank you all for watching this video so far. And if you have enjoyed what you've seen so far, I would really appreciate it if you could go ahead and subscribe to the channel. So why is it that so many people still consider two-handed bowling to be such a bad thing? Even though the title and thumbnail of this video is light-hearted, I actually think sin is quite an appropriate word, as there is such a negative reaction to two-handers. But what about a sport like tennis? The two-handed backhand shot is now just a part of the game, with the majority of players implementing this two-handed style for their backhand shots. It first appeared in the 70s, but it took some time for it to catch on. Many players and coaches thought it was a bit of a fad, as there were very few top players using this technique at the time. It took people a long time to realise just how effective it was at the top level, and it wasn't really until the 90s that its popularity started to explode, and now the two-handed backhand is pretty dominant in the game. But there doesn't seem to be this huge debate in tennis. I can't really say I've ever heard someone say, oh, those cheating tennis players using two hands, it's disgraceful. So why has this sort of change then been accepted in tennis, but not so much in bowling? Of course there is a difference, because perhaps there would be more outrage in tennis if players started using a two-handed forehand stroke. And if you're interested in tennis, definitely take a look at this two-handed forehand style, because it's actually quite interesting. There actually have been a couple of very successful players who have used this style, and Rafa Nadal has actually used the two-handed forehand style until he was about 12 years old. There are a number of players who believe it carries a lot of advantages, but it just hasn't taken off, as many people still believe that, I guess it's a style that many still believe is just less effective than the traditional one. Clearly in bowling there are a number of advantages to using two hands, and I think many bowlers are just extremely stuck in their ways. Perhaps we're just still in the early stages of two-handed bowling. Maybe it's going to take some time. Of course, you're never going to convince everybody, especially the staunch traditionalists, and I get that, but it does feel like the sport is still developing, and that two-handed bowling is just the first of many changes to come. Because even though the two-handed style really has just swept the world, in the grand scheme of things, it's still a relatively new thing for the game. So of course it's grown in popularity substantially in the last few years, but still it feels like there's a long way to go, and still other ways that we can progress in the game. And I think that two-handed bowling, as I say, in the grand scheme of things, it's still a relatively new thing, and these things just take time to integrate into any sport. Nobody could have predicted the explosion this style has created, because unfortunately we can't see into the future, and we just don't know where the sport will go next. At the end of the day, every single sport changes, and who knows what will happen in the future, because it only takes one player to spark a huge shift. Look at Steph Curry and the impact he's had on the game of basketball. 3-point shots are now so much more of a focus for many teams, and all the young players, well, they want to copy what Steph is doing. They want to try and shoot threes from half court, and it's the same in bowling. Young fans look at what these two-handers can do with a bowling ball, and it inspires them, and they think, I want to do that, I want to try that. And to me, this inspiration is never a bad thing if it's bringing people into the game. And I'm sure another player will come along in the future who will do something completely different and unexpected that will turn the sport of bowling on its head once more. But for now, I'm sure the one-handed and versus two-handed debate will rage on for some time. But love it or hate it, whether you think it's a joy to watch or borderline a sin, it's here to stay. So that brings us to an end to today's video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Are you yourself a one-handed or two-handed bowler? And what are your thoughts about the explosion that the two-handed style has created? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you have enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, bowling fans, and see you all next time.